Wonderful. All right. Well, welcome everybody. The CCIM San Diego chapter is happy to have you here at one of our first Lunch and Learn webinars. We are going to be discussing today, how is COVID-19 affecting the San Diego rental housing market? Our panelists have already been getting fired up. We've been talking about some of these very hot topics. So we are delighted that over 100 of you, close to 130 from what last count, have decided to attend our webinar today. We're going to be jam-packed with some wonderful content. So without further delay, let's get proceeded. Couple of housekeeping items. Attendees are in listen-only mode. And what that means is that we won't hear you, but you can certainly use the chat and Q&A features that are part of Zoom. If you have questions, which we will be getting to the questions really around the second half of the hour, please submit those questions through the Q&A box. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared following the event. And then you can also use the Zoom reaction buttons, the chat button, the raise hand Q&A. Try those out. Some of you may be new to the Zoom format, and just to let you know, this is our first webinar using Zoom, so we're all going to be new to it. There are going to be some screw-ups, and that just comes part of the territory. And none of us here on this presentation are professional speakers, so just know that words are clumsy. We're all professionals, however, in the important stuff, and that is the content and the expertise that we'll be covering today. Quick agenda. We're going to start. We're going to introduce everybody. Around 12:30, we will start with all the questions. This is really more about questions than about scripted presentations. We're going to conclude at 1 p.m. However, because we have so many folks and we have a number of questions around these very important topics, the speakers and the panelists have agreed to stay up until 1:30 p.m. for kind of a bonus Q&A session. So if your question doesn't get answered by 1 p.m., if you can and you're willing, stick around and we will be doing a bonus Q&A. A little bit about CCIM. If you don't know what the CCIM community is all about and the CCIM Institute, CCIM stands for Certified Commercial Investment Member. How you can identify someone who's earned their CCIM designation is by the lapel pin. Oh, I'm going backwards here. And basically what that means is that if you receive that designation, you've completed advanced coursework in financial and market analysis, you've have a portfolio of experience in the commercial real estate industry, and you've importantly made a pledge to govern your business with principles, ethics, honesty, and fair play. And of course, as part of the CCIM San Diego chapter, what we really try to do as a chapter is, through lunch and learns like this one, provide commercial real estate professionals really a place where they can have additional education programs, networking, and all of that to promote excellence and competency and collaboration within our industry. If you want to learn more about CCIM, please ping one of us or go to the CCIM San Diego website, and we'd be happy to tell you a little bit more about the value of this important designation. CCIM, by the way, is a global organization, and we're all held together by, again, the desire for excellency. Without certain individuals, we wouldn't be able to put on these webinars, and to start, what I would like to do is introduce our sponsors. And today, one of our platinum sponsors happens to be a panelist, and that is Jensen Properties of San Diego. Chris Jensen of Jensen Properties is the Chief Marketing and owner and CEO of the company. They provide property managements throughout San Diego County, as well as construction services. So I'm going to give Chris a little bit of time to tell you about his company. Take it away, Chris.
Hey, thanks, Doug. So we provide property management all around San Diego County. We've got properties from Chula Vista up to Oceanside, over 700 doors that we manage, mostly residential. We do stuff from condos and single families up to large apartment complexes. Some of our high points are, we have a flat fee, we don't charge leasing fees, and we answer the phone. We actually have a receptionist that answers the phone, so you're not going to get put to a directory every time you call in. We just love to hear from you and have a chance to manage your asset. We manage it like it's our own.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Chris. Our next platinum sponsor is Slat Capital. Slat Capital, formerly known as Barry Slat Mortgage. They specialize in commercial lending. And today we have Cody Sharforos. He's the principal and managing director of Slat Capital. And Cody, why don't you tell us a little bit about your company today?
Thanks, Doug. I appreciate it. And hello to all of our attendees. So I run our San Diego office for Slat Capital. We are primarily mortgage banking, a mortgage banking firm. We work with Southern California borrowers on properties here in Southern California and also across the country. We do a lot of multifamily. We do a lot of triple net leased properties and other asset types, including office, industrial, et cetera. We specialize in longer term life company style execution financing. So we'll do 10, 15, 20-year mortgages all day. And similar to Chris's operation, we are the servicer. So when you have a loan with us, you can call me, you can call my staff, and you're not in the, trapped in the middle of a phone tree to try to get to somebody that knows about your deal. So it's a little bit about us, but I'm excited to chat about the panel and COVID-19 implications.
Wonderful. Cody, we're delighted that you're here, as well as you, Chris, and thanks for supporting this worthy webinar today. And of course, CCIM couldn't do a lot of what we do without all of the number of sponsors that we have. I'm not going to go through every one of them, but we do appreciate all of our sponsors that help us out throughout the year in providing, again, great educational workshops as well as networking opportunities for the commercial real estate industry here in San Diego. It goes without saying that there are certain individuals that are part of the organization that we couldn't do without. And I just want to mention Martin Kramer, CCIM. Marty is our president this year. And boy, what a year to become president of any organization. And I just want to thank Marty for hanging in there with us and helping us maneuver through this challenging time. And then, of course, as I mentioned, Ellen Erst, we wouldn't be able to do anything without Ellen. She's phenomenal. And today we also have Paris Moe. Paris is, she is a USD student for real estate. She's also on the board of directors. And today she's going to be acting as our co-moderator. Paris, how are you today?
I'm fine. Very excited for the session.
Wonderful. Thanks for being here, and thanks for stepping up as co-moderator today. We're really happy for you to be here. Now I'm going to introduce each of our speakers. Again, starting from left to right, we have Chris Jensen. Chris, owner and chief marketing officer for Jensen Properties San Diego. We also have Miss Molly Kirkland. She is the public affairs director. I call her a lobbyist, but Southern California Rental Housing Association, a fantastic organization that if you're involved in multifamily or rental housing in San Diego, great organization to be a part of. Delighted also to have Wendy St. John. Miss St. John is the senior partner of the well-known Kimball Tyree St. John law firm. KTS is very well known in our industry, so it's great to have that wealth of knowledge coming from Miss St. John over the next hour. Again, we have Cody Sharforos. Cody is going to be our lender expert. Again, he's the principal and managing director of Slat Capital. And then finally, I am Doug Tabor. I'm a CCIM. I'm the current vice president of the chapter. I'm a rental housing realtor, so I'll be handling the brokerage piece of this. And I work with Keller Williams Realty and KW Commercial. So there's your panel. We have a lot of ground to cover, so we're going to move on. And our first area of question is, now that you know who we are, let's find out who we have in the audience. So we are going to do an interactive poll, and Paris is going to go ahead and put that poll up. And if you're in the audience, please take a moment to choose what role you play within the San Diego rental housing market. These polls are kind of fun. It gives us an idea of who we're talking to, and it also gives you an opportunity to engage. We have a couple of these different polls throughout the webinar today. And it looks like, it's like watching a horse race. You know, the lines get bigger. It looks like we have a lot of owner investors today, over 54%. Outstanding. No developers here, but that makes sense. They're probably out walking their properties and handling their buildings. We have some lenders here, and the winner on results is 56% of the folks in the audience are owner investors. Wonderful. We have lenders, we have brokers, we have property managers, attorneys, and we have other. So we have such a widespread, which is very good, which is what we love about CCIM is we cover so many different areas of expertise. So we'll go ahead and close that poll out now. And we're going to go to the next slide. So in this first section, what we're going to do, or what I've done, is I've asked each of the panelists to take a moment over the last couple days and think about, in these very unique times, you know, we have COVID-19, we have a pandemic, we have all of these changes that have just been dumped on our personal lives as well as our business lives. How has things changed, and what on your desk is really of greatest concern or has changed for your clients regarding COVID-19? And we're going to go ahead and just go from left to right. We'll start with Molly because she's on my left. So Molly, help me understand from the apartment association's perspective, what is of greatest concern right now with COVID-19?
That's kind of a tough list to narrow down. Obviously, every kind of regulatory action that is being put into place with regards to COVID-19 that applies to rental housing is of concern, whether we're talking about eviction moratoriums, assembly bills, Senate plans for, paying rent, and certainly on the federal level, tracking the CARES Act. So I think if I had to pick one thing, excuse me, I would say it's how what is going on right now plays into a very recent new law, and that's AB 1482, the Tenant Protection Act, and how it's really exacerbating some of those impacts.
So AB 1482 would be the rent control piece that came out in January that we've talked about a lot. So how, with regards to COVID-19, how has that changed what really was happening? Are they starting to add things to that, or they're going to make amendments, or how would that affect it?
There's a couple things going on. There's amendments in the work to clean up some of the language in the bill. They're technical for the most part, so nothing in there that necessarily improves that law. Maybe some clarity on CPI dates and some of those items. The issue is that the one thing I think they got right in AB 1482 was your ability to reset your rents to market rate at a vacancy. With this pandemic in place, that invokes these emergency declarations, which trigger Penal Code 396, which are price gouging rules. And a few years ago, there was legislation, AB 1919, that clarified how those apply to rental housing prices. So basically, if you were in a position where you were going to have a vacant unit and you were behind the 8 ball and you were going to go to market, you can't right now because of those emergency declarations. You're limited to a 10% increase. So again, if you were already behind the 8 ball, this has the potential to make it that you're going to be there for a little bit longer.
Got it. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. I thought I saw that they made some statements on it, but AB 828 was obvious of great concern. If you don't know what that is, that was when they were going to apply some sort of 25% mandatory reduction. What is the current status, really quickly, of AB 828?
Yeah, I actually get to share some good news. That bill was amended just a matter of days ago, and it removes that 25% rent reduction. So right now, it would still allow the courts to allow a tenant to remain in possession and to develop a payment plan for the rent that was previously owned. So while not perfect, we'll have to work on the details of how these payment plans will work, and anything else they try to put into the bill. We're definitely pleased that 25% came out, because that was of the utmost concern.
Yeah, big time. All right, wonderful. We're going to hear more from Molly. And Molly, again, represents the Southern California Rental Housing Association. And if you're an owner of rental properties in San Diego, you should most likely be a member of that association. I'm a huge fan and a huge proponent. So thanks, Molly, for staying on top of this stuff. Chris Jensen of Jensen Properties. Chris, along the same lines, what on your desk right now is of greatest concern for your clients regarding COVID-19?
Well, property management is a lot of time where the rubber hits the road. And so the biggest concern is money. Is money coming in or is money not coming out? And so in that case, I also have the opportunity to report mostly good news, which is that we're typically collecting around 98% of the rents.
Wow.
Now, the bad news is if you're one of those 2%, then you're not getting paid and you're not able to evict someone right now and you're not able to do much to protect yourself or your investment. So we're kind of waiting on the state to reduce their state of emergency, and hopefully at some point we can get these renters, some of which are just not cooperating because they don't want to cooperate and they have the opportunity, and then some of which really actually have a hardship that they're contending with. So on our side, what we're trying to do our best to do is communicate. I mean, our job in normal times is to stay out of court as well. So we're trying to communicate with these people, establish payment plans. We are documenting whether they have a hardship, and then documenting if they give us their documentation of hardship or not. And just keeping a good record so that when the courts open back up again, we can be ready with those tenants that either just can't pay or are not cooperating.
Do you find that your staff is taking a different approach to communicating with each of the tenants, or maybe it's something that's not normally done? You haven't always directly communicated with tenants in the past. Are you guys being a lot more proactive? It sounds like.
Yeah, so normally it's kind of, we have automatic communication that goes out to these people. Most renters don't like to feel like renters. They like to feel like homeowners. And so normally we like to just be a good customer service side for our tenants when they have a maintenance issue or a technical issue in the payment of their rent. Right now, we're communicating probably 2 or 3 times more, maybe up to 10 times more often with these tenants, letting them know what's going on, establishing payment plans. You know, we can't really serve notices and do late fees like normal, and so what we're trying to do is just communicate with these people. And so, yeah, it's a lot more communication.
Do you have, if you had to pick one piece of advice, I hate to put you on the spot, but for those independent owners that are out there, you know, you're managing a large portfolio, what one piece of advice would you give?
My advice right now would be lots of times an independent owner will go in heavy and hard and blustering and with some intimidation. My advice right now would be to stay away from that method. There's no way for you to back it up, and to just be kind, empathetic, and try to establish a payment plan. Even if that payment plan means they're paying $50 this month, try to get them paying something this month.
Great advice. Thanks, Chris. We look forward to hearing more of your expertise throughout the remainder of the hour. Wendy St. John, Kimball Tyree St. John, what on your desk, I'm sure there's a lot of things on your desk in your line of work, especially in this environment. What on your desk is of greatest concern for your clients regarding COVID-19?
Well, hello everyone, and thank you, Doug, for inviting me to join you today. The most important thing that I'm thinking about is that landlords understand to look before they leap. Everything is different. There are so many layers of rules in place, federal, state, local, and judicial council. And they're moving parts. For example, the local rules, which include eviction moratoria in many different cities or resolutions in the county for unincorporated areas. Those are changing. And in fact, in San Diego, the city of San Diego, as well as Imperial Beach, Chula Vista, San Marcos, and is there one more, Molly?
Escondido, maybe?
I think, not that I know of, but San Diego, San Marcos, Chula Vista, Imperial Beach, Oceanside, that's it. Just yesterday or recently changed their ordinance effective end dates from May 31st to June 30th. So each ordinance has different rules about what a landlord can and cannot do, and I'll give you details on some of those later today if you're interested. But some of them will penalize a landlord for serving a 3-day notice at the wrong time. So you want to be very careful not to just give a 3-day notice. I love Chris's idea of communicating with your tenants. There's nothing to stop you from writing a letter saying, for example, hey, we haven't received April rent. We haven't received any notice from you of inability to pay for COVID or any other reason. Please reach out to us. We'd like to talk to you about a payment plan. That does two things. It confirms the amount due, and it also confirms whether or not you've heard from them about inability to pay. Because for every tenant who's told you they can't pay for a COVID-related reason, there are 2 more who got good unemployment and $600 a week checks from the government and aren't paying because they believe they have the right to withhold rent. And that's a bad idea for them because no rents are being forgiven. They're just, landlords can't collect them at the moment if the tenant qualifies. I also am concerned about the CARES Act, which it's the only rule that I'm aware of that protects tenants without the need for them to tell the landlord of their inability to pay for COVID-19 related reasons, such as a substantial loss of income, illness, taking care of kids who are out of school, that type of thing. The CARES Act, which applies, and you may be aware, to many subsidized units, Section 8 tax credit, as well as federally backed mortgages, FHA, VA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. So if you have a property that falls under that protection, the tenants are called, well, it's called a covered unit. If you have a tenant in a covered unit, you're not allowed to charge a late fee, give a pay rent or quit notice, or file an eviction for non-payment of rent. So you don't even need to hear from the tenant, and you can't insist that they tell you. They could tell you, I have the money, but I don't want to pay you. And they're still protected under CARES, if CARES applies to them. So landlords don't want to serve a notice that violates CARES or a local ordinance. Some local ordinances impose fines on landlords who do that. They subject you to orders, criminal orders, and a few of them also state it's a defense in an eviction down the road. So what I foresee is a landlord serving a bad notice, let's say in April, and then they learn, oh, I shouldn't have done that. So they wait and then down the road proceed correctly. There's nothing to say that bad notice can't be used as a shield. I would argue, of course, that if the landlord didn't sue on it, it's not a problem, but it's not whether I'm right or wrong. The landlord wants to stay out of court. We'll also talk about Judicial Council Emergency Rule 1, which basically, although the courts are set to reopen Tuesday in San Diego, they're not processing evictions, basically. They're not issuing a summons or entering a default judgment without certain emergency orders where there's a threat to public health and safety. So you really don't want to make a mistake on a case, because by the time you get to court, it might be 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the road. And to lose on a technicality will lose you so much time and money, will exacerbate your frustration. So I will close by saying, look before you leap. Don't go serving notices until you know all the rules that apply.
Wow, a lot of information. I'm sure you guys are scrambling to keep up with it all. And we could probably do a whole webinar piece on just the changes in the laws alone. Maybe that's something we might consider in the future. And we have, just before I jump forward with Cody, one quick question. I see that a lot of there's different rules coming from the federal level, from the state level, from the county level, to the city level. Who takes precedence? If an owner is wondering, okay, well, this rule is from county, this one's from federal, which one is the hierarchy? Or
Well, it depends on the situation, but right now what takes precedence in San Diego is the Judicial Council Emergency Rule 1, because they've basically shut down our court for evictions, for any meaningful evictions. But every rule has a different effect. I could get into the technicality of it, but I don't think it would be useful. There's not a one-size-fits-all answer.
Got it. Well,
It depends on where the property is located and what type of funding and what type of housing.
By the way, to all the listeners out there, we have an email that's going to go out that's going to have a repeat of this presentation that you'll be able to watch. It'll be recorded, as well as handouts from some of the different panelists. Feel free, please, to contact KTS office here in San Diego or Jensen Properties, the Rental Housing Association, Slat Capital. If you can't find their information, just reach out to CCIM here. We'll make sure we get you guys connected with them. Cody, with regards to lending, lots happening in the lending world, as we can see. What on your desk is of greatest concern?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in two categories. The first category is looking in the rearview mirror. So a lot of our clients are worried about, if I can't make the kind of income that I expect, and I'm still required to do, make payments on property taxes and insurance and all the other major expenses that occur managing a property. What kind of a relief can I have, if absolutely necessary, with my loan? Can we renegotiate some level of terms? Common structure for the loans that truly need it that we've been doing is where a loan may be normally amortizing on maybe a 30-year schedule with principal and interest due. We've made it interest only for 90 days, just to help on that overall cash flow. If we're really in trouble even more, there's other relief options. But the message on that front really is, number one, take a deep breath. We work with you to figure it out. We're also working with some of our clients who we don't have their loans directly on our portfolio, but we're working with them on their behalf to work with their existing lender to work through any issues that they may have and help negotiate on their behalf. But the biggest thing is to do the right thing. So if you truly are hurting because the income isn't coming in and all of that, then that's great. We will find relief for you, but we need to be able to document it, and we need to be able to present it in the right light so that they can, the servicer, whoever it is, whether it's our company or Wells Fargo or whomever, can deal with the information properly and legally. So that's number one, is take a breath and communicate and give us as much information as possible. Lean on your property managers to get the latest and greatest information on how your tenants are doing. Sometimes we're even asking, in some cases, where are your collections, through April 30th, and then we'll ask again on May 5th, and then we'll ask again on May 15th. And so it's going to be a lot of communication, but it's definitely something that's addressable. Just as a side note on that front, on our portfolio, we have $4.4 billion in loans, and that represents around 1,300 loans. And these are all smaller balance loans, averaging of about $3 million. So some loans at 500,000, other loans, 10 million. But as of right now, as of today in our portfolio, we have about 12.5% of those loans that have had some level of relief. And most of those are in that interest-only type range, because once we looked under the hood, we were able to figure out the best financial setup in order to get the landlords through. Now the question becomes, what happens after the 90 days? And what we are saying and what our master servicers are saying at the moment is that there will be more relief if it's necessary. Now we're hoping, and we're seeing the same things that Chris is seeing in the portfolio, that collections are actually much stronger than people have expected. Maybe some of the individual amounts might be a little bit lower than normal or other structures. But the National Rental Housing Association has a weekly poll that they take in Class B and Class A properties that are managed through Yardi and some of the other property management systems. And over 11 million units as of May, we have collections at 88%. And in 2019 May this time, so the year-over-year change, those collections are 90%. So the difference between Mays is 2%. Now that's total collections. A lot of those are reduced amounts. So you sort of take that data with a grain of salt, and you also have to take that data because most of those owners are institutional. They're larger. These are Class B and A properties. For folks that maybe are less affected by unemployment and the other issues than we have with our portfolio, for example, because we deal with a lot of smaller properties, 10 and 20 unit properties. But nonetheless, it's a much better story than I think anybody expected maybe 6 weeks ago.
Yeah, I agree with you. In fact, I'm talking to the average independent owner, everything from the single family up to the, say, 25 unit apartment building. And they are saying that people are paying. So the question of whether tenants, at least through April and May, are paying their rent is come out in the positive. So that's the good news. It sounds like from what I'm hearing from each of you is the best thing for anybody to do that's in the business is just communicate with those tenants, with those lenders, with anybody you need to communicate with that you're having struggles, and everybody seems to be willing to help folks along because we're all, quite honestly, in this together, as everybody keeps saying. Wonderful. Well, Cody, thanks for that update on the loan side. At this stage, we're at the half of the hour. What we're going to do is we're going to move into the question and answer phase of the presentation. But before we do, we have a quick audience poll that we would like to present to you. So Paris, if you go ahead and put it up. So with this poll, we're going to ask, everybody's doing things differently these days, as you've heard of the panelists, and which items below are you most likely to invest in or have invested in as a landlord? And this would be things that maybe we didn't consider in the past: air filtration systems, touchless control systems, more janitorial staff and training, wellness and health focused. These are probably items that are considered when you're talking about the big institutional players or the new Class A buildings. But San Diego, as many know, on the rental housing side is primarily 60% is 11 units and under of our housing stock on the multifamily. So these might be items that weren't really considered in the past. And now with COVID and the concerns of spreading viruses, maybe something that folks are considering. So let's wrap up this poll. And it looks like the big one is additional janitorial training and staff, followed at 54%, followed by air filtration. Interesting, at 43%, probably more for East County. Good for janitorial companies. So Chris, maybe that sounds like an arm of your business that you can add on if you want to get busier. Start a janitorial service. Okay. Paris, thanks for putting that poll up. I'm going to go ahead and shut it out. And at this stage, I see that there are questions coming in through the chat box. So the way we've structured this, if you probably remember when you registered, there was a section which would allow you to put a question in. We're going to answer those questions first, and then all of the questions in the chat box we're going to try to get to. So if you feel like the chat box is getting full of questions and your question's not getting answered, again, we're going to try to get through all of them. Essentially, we have 30 minutes and then another 30 minutes to try to get through everybody's question. So I'm going to go ahead and start. The first question of the day is, what do you see happening after the moratoriums on evictions, defaults, and foreclosure sales are removed? And Wendy, why don't you help us with that answer?
Well, while Judicial Council Emergency Rule number 1 remains in effect, which by its own language says 90 days after the state of emergency is lifted or upon its amendment, unlawful detainers are aren't moving forward because the summons won't issue and a default won't enter. What that means is even cases that are not COVID related aren't moving forward. So what I see happening is landlords wanting to do business as usual and seeing that maybe the eviction moratorium has ended and some tenants haven't paid and they don't have any COVID related grounds for not paying. And landlords are going to experience deep frustration at the fact that their hands are tied. Again, Chris's advice to work with your tenants makes complete sense to me. Not only to work out a payment plan, but perhaps to work out a move-out agreement, cash for keys even. In the case of, let's say you have a dangerous tenant and there's a shooting or a knifing, and you can't move quickly through the courts, maybe it's worth spending the money you would spend on litigation to buy that tenant out. Normally, that's very distasteful because our eviction court procedures are reasonably fast. You can file a case and get in and out of court in 2 to 4 months usually. But if that's looking like 6 months plus and maybe longer due to court backlog and social distancing, be creative. So I see also a lot of tenants may skip. They'll get a few months where they haven't paid and maybe they'll just move on and get a fresh start. And that, I see things being very different than just business as usual. So change is what I see. Constant shifting sands.
Well, at our vacancy rates here in San Diego, if a tenant skips, aside from the fact that they're skipping out on rent, at least you'll be able to rent that property. So that's good news. Wonderful. Okay, next question. Are there programs that tenants can access to help them pay rent, Molly?
Yes, but not enough. Really what we have in place is a program that's available via United Way that was funded by some private local business groups. So if you're having trouble with rent, utilities, I think even food, they will provide some assistance. What we really need, and instead of eviction moratoriums and the like, is cash flow. Right? We need to kind of, to quote, I think, Councilmember Kersey yesterday, just an injection of money into the market via rental assistance. So we have renters who can't pay rent in some cases, landlords not receiving money. There is CARES money, additional CDBG funds available in many jurisdictions. In the city of San Diego is going to be pursuing something, but a rental assistance program would be key in making everybody whole. So, could run similarly to Section 8 in that the housing provider would get the funds directly. The tenant would apply and then the funding would go directly to the landlord. So for those folks who are suffering on both sides of the coin right now, it's kind of a win-win. So I don't see the state creating anything like that. There are a few bills that kind of touch on that. I think more than anything, they'll end up maybe being a framework on how federal funding is distributed. But until we get money out there for tenants to pay, they may end up with these huge balloon payments at the end of all this, and landlords, may end up with, as Wendy said, tenants who just skip out.
So that's where the association is going to put their efforts in trying to help implement some sort of rental assistance program, or at least put that out there to the council. And
yeah, we sent a letter a few weeks back to the mayor and the council suggesting that very thing. Later that day or the next day, Councilman Chris Ward sent a memo around saying he wanted to explore something like that, and Councilmember Sherman a few days ago said something similarly. So I have some calls coming up and we'll be discussing that. Of course, devil's always in the details, so we got to make sure that, while we're getting something, that we're not giving away the farm, because quite often in some of these, moving parts that we've seen in different jurisdictions and at different levels of government, are essentially asking landlords to give something away, and there, for instance, there's a proposal for rental assistance, but it in some cases might only cover up to 80% of the rent. So is it fair to ask a landlord to take a 20% hit? It's going to, of course, be dependent on everybody, individual situation, but nevertheless, there's always a give and take, and we just want to make sure that, landlords don't have to give up too much, since really everything thus far has been pretty one-sided.
Yeah, I say a 20% hit is not fair to the landlords. Okay, next question. Has the presence of military in San Diego helped stabilize or balance unemployment numbers? I'm going to field that one. I had the pleasure of sitting on a webinar yesterday that was hosted by Exeter 1031 Exchange Services, and Alan Nevin, our esteemed local economist of the Xpera Group, was talking about this very, very item. And essentially what Alan was saying is that our diverse economy, fortunately here in San Diego, we have such a diverse economy of basic jobs, which mean jobs that bring money in from other places and not just tourism, that we should be okay. Not just the fact that we have a great military, but we also have a lot of government jobs. We have a strong healthcare, also professional, scientific, and technical jobs. We have biotech. So in essence, over 50% of our jobs here in San Diego County are those types of jobs. And many of those folks didn't stop working. They just stopped working at their office and are working at home. So according to Alan Nevin, we should be in good shape for the foreseeable future. And that is that should answer that to the best of at least my ability. If you want more information, certainly reach out to Xpera Group. In fact, I think Alan put something on LinkedIn today with regards to this question. Okay, next question is for Wendy. Wendy, can you increase rent during COVID? What does the law say?
Molly talked about this a little bit at the beginning. None of the local moratoria that I'm aware of, and there are over 100 throughout the state, so there may be one I didn't read or don't remember. So I always give you the precaution. We have to check in your geographic location where the property is before we can know. But typically none of the local moratoria prohibit rent increases. They all prohibit evictions, late charges, or filing an eviction or serving a notice to pay rent or quit. Rent increases aren't addressed. Rent increases are instead addressed in state law, AB 1482 rent caps, which are 5% plus cost of living, which I think in San Diego, Molly, was at 1.8% most recently.
Yes.
So 6.8% is the rent cap in San Diego. There may be price gouging issues when there's a state of emergency in place. It protects tenants from rent increases of over 10% for 30 days after the state of emergency. The governor has issued a state of emergency, and then he's issued some follow-up executive orders addressing price gouging in different degrees. He addressed paragraph B of Penal Code 396, and then he addressed paragraph F, which has to do with housing and raising rent when one tenant moves out, which Molly referred to as vacancy decontrol. The bottom line is you might need to look at whether you're in a rent control district, the rent increase your tenant has had over the previous year, because the total can't exceed 6.8% in San Diego, and that varies by jurisdiction. And if there's a state of emergency in effect, it may have limited your ability to raise rent more than 10%, depending on when you did the rent increase.
Chris,
Can we add on a little?
Go for it.
Yeah, I think there are a few jurisdictions that have done rent increase freeze. LA, obviously, right?
Oh, I forgot LA. I blocked it.
Kind of LA and San Francisco, their own little kind of kingdoms amongst themselves in some cases. El Cajon, interestingly, was going to pursue something along those lines, and we kind of pushed back and said, listen, we'd like to think that our members and most folks aren't going to be doing that during this crisis. There's going to be a one-off here and there, but do we really need to go down the path of legislation on that front? And ultimately, they did pass a resolution, which doesn't have any teeth in it, but basically asking, for the next couple months, don't do a rent increase. That was our only real local threat on that front. But I will say there are folks out there who are not only calling for freezes on rent increases, but cancel rent. So, keep your eyes open, your ears open. Those things may pop up.
Thank you, Molly, for adding that.
Molly, thank you. Next area is going to be around valuations with Cody. Cap rates. How have you seen valuations being affected and how it's affecting cap rates?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, and it's one that's developing, obviously. So there hasn't been enough comps traded. There hasn't been enough sales that have closed in COVID-19 to really answer that question accurately. However, what we have seen on recent appraisals, and recent meaning in the last few days, the last couple of weeks, is that some appraisers, many of them, are building in COVID-19 discounts, whether it's a refinance or it's a brand new sale. Now that can have an effect, obviously, on a transaction, an active transaction that is a purchase and sale. It can definitely have an effect on a refinance. Every time we've gone back to the MIA, or the MAI, I'm sorry, and questioned why this is, how do you justify it? Where's the data per MAI standards to suggest that this should be adjusted? And frankly, most of those folks don't have any real justification. It's just a perception. Now, I would imagine that the perception is the rule here. So in other words, if you are actively buying something in this environment, you're probably not going to offer the kind of cap rate that you would have just 6 weeks or 8 weeks ago. So I imagine there's probably some softening just because of that perception. But as of now, I don't see any real data to support any real softening in any real sense. Obviously, if value add properties, if you're going to buy a 10-unit building and you're going to rehab it, make it really nice and increase rents, if you're not going to be able to increase the rents to a business plan that makes sense to you, that pro forma cap rate no longer makes as much sense, and therefore your purchase cap rate can't be there either. So I think it's going to have implications, but it's really hard to tell what that is. The last little bit I would tell on this topic is the Mortgage Bankers Association, which covers all commercial, all residential properties nationwide. Their economists put out some data early on in this crisis that looked at the previous two downturns, economic downturns, and the relationship between the cap rates at those times pre-downturn and post-downturn, and the relationship of the U.S. Treasury bond, which is oftentimes that spread between those two, is a measure of how resistant folks are to any increased risk. And what they found is that when there's a large movement of unemployment specifically, there is usually a subsequent movement in cap rates, but that cap rate movement doesn't come to fruition for a full 18 months after the original movement. So now in this case, the unemployment change was much more dramatic than the last two, and is a developing story. So it may be a different story now, but what I'm telling my clients is we're probably not going to know positively or negatively for a while. On that front too, this other conclusion with that same set of data that they came to, the Mortgage Bankers Association, is that in pre-COVID-19, the cap rates on a risk-adjusted basis were already relatively high versus where they were in the previous cycles. That sounds counterintuitive because we think about a 4% or a lower cap rate as being very low. But actually, because interest rates are so low, the 10-year Treasury, that spread was actually very wide beforehand. So the economist argument is that even if there is a large movement in cap rates, the argument is there may not be a large movement of cap rates because there was already some built-in buffer before this occurred. So we'll see.
I agree with you. And even CoStar is saying that cap rates are expected to rise and things could soften, but it's still too soon to tell. Not enough closings. I mean, typically on a 5+ commercial property, it's going to take 60 to 90 days to close. Oftentimes now things getting spread out through the COVID process, it's probably taking longer. The next question is along those lines. Do you think the market will crash? Are property prices going lower? I think you pretty much answered that. And it's interesting that the appraisers are already pricing in caution, right? And I'm assuming that the lenders are being more cautious and everybody's being cautious without factual data to really back it up, considering the fact that folks are still paying their rent and still living in their properties. Okay.
Yeah, that's right, Doug. And just to jump in real quick, I talked about the rearview mirror when it comes to my clients. In the forward-looking realm, uncertainty is really a problem for investors, as everybody knows. And uncertainty is really a problem for lenders too. And so what we are finding is that most of our lenders don't quite know where the market is going to be or is. They want to know a lot of information about their peers because there's a number of lenders that have exited the market. They're no longer active. And there are other lenders that have changed their pricing. And in general, it's uncertain right now. And so uncertainty is not really good overall for a market. But I also see a lot of folks wanting the information and craving it, which tells me that once people start to get a little bit more comfortable, the market will, while it may be a little bit softer now, it's probably going to come back pretty quickly. Because if folks were really afraid, they'd be just not talking at all. And they're not doing that. They're asking for more information.
That makes sense. Things have definitely quieted down significantly. And that is really what we're hearing from CoStar as well. When their analysts call, I always ask them, and they said it's been crickets. Paris, why don't we take a moment and jump into the chat box and pull a question from our audience that is currently asking questions.
Sure, Doug. We received quite a number of questions. A big thank you to all of our attendees for such high level of engagement. So the first question that came in was a scenario-based question. It says, what can you do about tenants abandoning their cars in prime community parking locations for long periods of time?
What can you do about abandoned cars? Interesting. This sounds like a Wendy St. John question and maybe a Chris Jensen question. Wendy?
Well, it's not related to COVID-19. So look to the terms of your lease and do what you would normally do. Chris, what are your procedures?
Sorry, I was on mute there. We typically will put a notice on the car that we'll be towing it if they don't remove it within a certain period of time. And there's already things in their lease as well as in the apartment signage that lets them know that that's going to happen as well. So we're executing on, I would execute on that the way you normally would.
The important thing being go to Southern California Rental Housing Association, which Molly's representing, and be sure to use their forms, and then you'll have the proper paperwork in place with signed agreements by the tenant with regard to what their obligations are about where to park and what the remedy is if they don't follow those rules.
Thank you.
Got it. Oh, you want to grab another one, Paris?
Yeah, the second question is directed to Wendy as well. It says, my understanding of my Section 8 tenant is even if they can't pay their portion of the rent, the city of Oceanside would be required to increase their portion to cover the full rent. Is that incorrect?
That is incorrect. I can expound a little bit.
Please.
There is nothing in the CARES Act that says the housing agency will pay the tenant's portion of the rent. If the tenant's unable to pay for any reason, the landlord can't proceed, and the date for that to end right now, Oh my gosh, I wrote it down and I'll look at it and tell you before we get off this seminar. But even when the CARES Act ends, so here it is, July 27th. Even at that point, the landlord can't give a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit, or a 10-day, whatever the lease requires. At that point, the tenant is entitled to 30 days before they have to move. So I would translate that to a 30-day notice to pay rent or quit for the tenant's portion. Now, the person who asked that question may be thinking of when you're in the midst of an eviction with a tenant and they don't pay their portion of the rent, the housing agency will still pay their portion through the eviction period. But the housing authority, I've never known them to pay the tenant's portion unless it's a special program, and I'd have to see the paperwork to advise. Have you heard of that, Molly?
No, not at all. The only, maybe in the city of San Diego, the Housing Commission, since they're moving to Work Housing Authority, they have extra funding that doesn't have all the same HUD rules that they could use, but I've never heard of that otherwise.
Yeah, they don't have that in the city of San Diego. They just have some assistance with lending tenants money for a security deposit and paying the landlord a little bit more if the security deposit doesn't cover damages at move out.
A lot of questions here on, and that covers a lot of the questions here on when a landlord will be able to require a tenant to pay rent. It seems like it's a moving target.
Do you want me to grab it?
Sure.
You have to look at where the property is located, and you have to look at whether or not there's a subsidized tenant in there, or if you have a federally backed mortgage. So for both of those, if you have a Section 8 tenant, for example, or if your mortgage is FHA or VA, you can't do anything until July 27th, and then it's a 30-day pay or quit. If you are not subject to the CARES Act, you look at what city you're in and see if there is an eviction moratorium in that city, and if so, when it ends. If you're not in a city, you might be in an unincorporated area of the county of San Diego. San Diego has a resolution, which is also an eviction moratorium for residents in the unincorporated area of San Diego County. So we have on our website, kts-law.com, a COVID-19 box you can check, and it will pull up a list of all the ordinances throughout the state, as well as the CARES Act, the governor's executive order, and some other interesting information. We have a second list of court open and close dates throughout the state of California. So if you like to read and research, feel free to take a look. It's kind of fun to read those different things. Otherwise, call an attorney.
Wonderful. Thank you, Wendy. We're going to be coming up on the hour here, but before we do, this question kind of falls in line with what that last question was asking. Maybe Cody can help us with this one, although Molly and Wendy, you might be able to jump in as well. If your apartment lender is not FHA, Fannie, or Freddie, does the current version of the CARES Act or Main Street offer any help, Cody?
No, no, it doesn't explicitly, as far as I'm aware, and certainly Wendy and Molly can correct me here. But that does not mean that there isn't relief in sight. So just because there isn't explicit relief because your mortgage is not, explicitly covered within CARES, does not mean there isn't a way to structure something to get you through for a few months.
Molly, do you want to jump in, or Wendy, do you have anything to add?
The only thing I'll add is for properties in California, the governor negotiated with some of the major banks and a couple hundred credit unions throughout the state, and they basically all agreed to provide some form of mortgage forbearance, which is good for some folks. However, what we have found out in conversations with some members along the way is that it doesn't exactly apply to everybody. So depending on your bank, they may say, yeah, no, because we consider that a commercial loan and not a residential because it's an apartment building. So, everybody thought, oh, great, we're going to get mortgage forbearance at the state level across the board. But it sounds like it's primarily for single family residential at this point.
If I could, the CARES Act does not just protect single family. Are you saying that the governor talking to banks was for single family?
I'm saying that the agreement with the banks had with the governor seems like it's kind of trickling down mostly to impact single family home ownership, because like I said, we've heard from members that they've called and asked for that forbearance and they've said, no, yours is a commercial loan.
Okay. I haven't had a lot of feedback on it, but I do know that our advice has been contact your bank by phone, follow up in writing. Many banks are giving you forbearance. I spoke to someone in person who said his bank said, pay what you want for the next 3 months or pay nothing, and we'll add on with interest payments at the tail end of your agreement. So some banks are doing it, but it's not because they have to.
Yeah.
Unless they fall under CARES.
And to Wendy's point, you have to be real diligent. You may have to make multiple calls and lots of follow up.
Absolutely.
And that kind of thing. Yeah, you've got to lean on them hard because they're not going to do it, just because out of the goodness of their heart, right? You got to pester them.
It sounds like, again, the common theme I'm hearing throughout this entire hour is communicate with people. Don't bury your head in the sand. Communicate to your lender, communicate to your tenants, just constantly communicate, because that's how you get the results that you're looking for. It's now the top of the hour. On behalf of the CCIM chapter in San Diego, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We are going to, again, open up for a bonus round to continue answering questions until 1:30, but we know not everybody's going to be able to participate. If you want more information on CCIM San Diego, here's our website on the screen, ccimsandiego.com. And then what I'm going to do as we close out from each of the speakers, just ask you if you can tell the listeners how folks can get more information, or maybe you have specifically COVID-19 web pages. Where's the best place for them to find more information from you or make contact with your organization? We'll start with Molly with the Southern California Rental Housing Association.
Great. Thank you, Doug. And thanks again for including me in the association in this. We have created a COVID-19 resource page. If you go to our website, www.socalrha.org, you'll kind of get a pop-up and you can click on that and it'll take you to our webpage. Like Wendy, we have a list of the moratoriums that are out there, and we need to update that obviously since several have been extended.
Oh, so do we.
Yeah. It's a constant basically. We also have resources from the National Apartment Association there, and they have really good breakdowns of the CARES Act if you want to learn more about that. We also have included some recent articles, media, kind of the chatter out there, some state resources, you name it, the counties, since we represent also, Riverside and Imperial counties, we're including links to their relative public health sites, court sites, you name it. So, if you're looking for something, I would really suggest you go there. And if you can't find it, then give us a call. With regards to moratoriums, though, I will say, please, if you don't do your research like Wendy suggested, and you're a member and you're calling us, we will have to ask lots of questions because everything right now is so detailed, based on where your property is, what kind of property type, are you already exempt from 1482? And there's lots of things that we, have to ask to get, the right answer. So some of the questions that we get today, we can't necessarily answer without asking more questions, I guess is one way to say
Sure.
it.
And what's the phone number, Molly, really quickly?
858-278-8070.
858-278-8070.
Correct.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Molly. And Wendy St. John. Wendy, what's the best way for folks to get a hold of you guys over there at KTS?
You can get hold of us through our website, www.kts-law.com. Our phone number is 619-34-1690. Our offices are closed, but we're all working from home. And I thought of something that I wanted to add quickly, and that is, this is a great time, since you can't evict your tenants, for you to do an audit and make sure you have complied with all the AB 1482 notice requirements. Some of those have deadlines in June or July of this year. You should find out if your properties are exempt, or if you need to give a notice of exemption or notice of application of AB 1482, you might be a great time to make a spreadsheet to make a list of the age of each of your buildings. When did the certificate of occupancy get issued? Maybe a spreadsheet with a link to the certificate of occupancy. And also you might want to look into doing an audit to make sure you've complied with your rent caps, going back to when the rent cap law, was that effective back March 15th of 19, I think. Because the longer you have bad rents, the more complicated it will be down the road. And we're still only about a year and a few months out from March of last year. So it would be a great time to make sure you're in compliance with rent caps and AB 1482 notices.
Great advice. Thank you, Wendy. And again, we're going to be answering more questions. Chris Jensen, what's the best way folks that are looking for a property management company could get a hold of you and your company?
You can find us on the web at Jensen Properties SD, like San Diego.com, or you can call us at 858-449-7294. We do have an owner blog that we're trying to keep up to date. It's like Molly and Wendy said, it's impossible to keep totally up to date. I think I just did a video last week that is already now probably outdated, but you can check that out. And all of the information on our pricing and things like that is on the website as well.
And that's Jensen, Jensen Properties?
Yep. SD.com.
SD.com. Thanks, Chris. And Cody,
Ours is simple. You can reach us on slat.com. That's SLATT.com/SD. Get you to the San Diego team. And you can reach me on my direct line at 858-257-2110.
Wonderful. Thank you again, everybody, for participating. And now we're going to go ahead and move into the bonus question section. Sounds exciting, but it's going to be more questions from our chat box. So Paris, if you have some questions, let's pull them out.
Yeah, so up next is a question on eviction. It says, is it okay during this time to give a tenant a 60-day notice, even though it's not for financial reason?
Well, not without checking, because some of the ordinances prohibit a no-cause eviction. Chula Vista does and San Diego does, and CARES Act may.
Thank you. The next one would be, are tenants in San Diego required to provide documentation to the landlord to establish that their reason for non-payment of rent is COVID-19 related?
You want to get it, Molly?
The City of San Diego's ordinance does require that within 7 days of providing notice on or before the day rent is due, that they need to prove a financial hardship and provide some sort of documentation. And Wendy, look to you to kind of add on to this. The issue is the governor's order that established an eviction moratorium kind of statewide where there weren't rules in place says you have to have it, but you don't have to provide it. You have to hang on to it. And then essentially, again, with the court issue, I mean, even if they don't provide the documentation, you can't really do the 3-day anyway. So, again, sure, no.
That brings up a great point. The court in San Diego and many other courts statewide have made orders that these court closure dates are quote unquote a holiday for purpose of filing papers with the court. And it's unclear whether filing papers means serving eviction notices. So you can serve an eviction notice, but there are alternative eviction notices, which is pay or quit or perform or quit. Those notices have to pass on business days. So a pay or quit doesn't even count while the court is closed. The days don't even count.
Good point.
So I forgot the question.
It was about
So many rules, it's
San
easy to
Diego,
forget
yeah.
the question.
The
I
other
have a question over here that Cody might be able to answer. Cody, what changes in unit mix do you foresee in regards to future apartment projects?
Well, this is just my personal opinion, obviously. I'm an older millennial. Obviously wanted to be in major infill locations and walkable areas. A lot of those walkable areas during the shutdown became a whole lot less walkable. But to the extent that the unit was a walk-up unit or was had a small outdoor area, that was much more valuable than being in a large high-rise downtown with no real outdoor amenity. Pre-COVID-19, being in city centers and dense urban areas was an amenity. During a shutdown like COVID-19 caused nationwide and worldwide, that amenity was stripped away. So I think that we're going to probably see some larger units coming out of particularly high-rise Class A style brand new construction buildings post this. I also see the smaller garden style apartments being more desirable overall than they were even prior to this, because you can walk right up into your unit. You don't have to be in an elevator with other people. And there's generally more light and air available to you, even if the unit is still relatively small. I also see a number of my peers that were living downtown are starting to look at East County and other areas because they want more space, and they can't afford, to have a larger penthouse downtown. So they're buying more single family homes. I think the single family home rental market is going to benefit from this overall. So I think it's going to be a shift of attitude more than anything.
Yeah, interesting you mentioned single family homes, because, we don't really talk about that. This is more on the commercial side, but the single family home market, from what I understand, is still going as strong as it was when we started. We only have, according to Alan Nevin yesterday, we only have 22 average list time on market is about 22 days. And we have about a month and a half of inventory. And I talked to another agent who works in the Orange County market, and apparently Los Angeles and Orange County are not doing as well on the single family side as we are here in San Diego. I'm not sure why. Los Angeles, as Molly mentioned earlier, has a lot more restrictions. They're going to be locked down a lot more. Their mayor seems to be more strict. Our mayor seems to be ready, at least San Diego mayor seems to be ready to get going. And it does not seem like the single family market has slowed down in regards to sales. And that makes a lot of sense, that folks are going to be looking for more space. That'll be good for a lot of our older properties that have all of that space. Maybe like you mentioned, not as good for the high rises, but that's going to require, we have an apartment stock of 1960s and 70s. So that's going to require value add. So maybe our market won't skip a beat once the investors come back. It seems like there's a lot of money on the sidelines just waiting for a crash so they can go in and buy at a discount rate. And it doesn't seem like that's happened. So we'll just hope for the best. Paris, what else do you have in our chat box as far as questions?
Yeah, I have a question asking for thoughts on Bill SB 939, which is currently proposed. And the question asks if panelists think that would affect or negate commercial leases.
That sounds like a Molly question.
I'll admit I haven't followed it too closely since it's commercial and not residential. So I will tell you what's in the bill, and then you can tell me what you think will happen. But essentially, it's going to prevent evictions of commercial tenants until the state of emergency is lifted. What I think is interesting, it would make an eviction in violation of those provisions unenforceable, void, and would make harassment or mistreatment or retaliation against a tenant punishable by a fine not to exceed $2,000 for each violation. Things like harassment, mistreatment, those are really subjective. So whenever I see those kinds of things in bills, it always gives me a little heartburn that it's just setting property owners or managers up for some kind of suit or, shakedown. So I'll look into the bill more, but I can't really, not being on the commercial side, I can't say what will happen.
All right. What next? Paris?
Next one would be one about new tenant qualification. What are some of the new qualifications panelists see that are coming as a result of COVID-19?
Well, you have to be careful of fair housing issues. So you can't refuse to rent someone because they had COVID, I don't think. And you can't ask health related questions normally without risking a fair housing violation. I can't think of any new qualifications. Do you, Molly or Chris? Chris, are you still there?
I think he had to jump off for a second.
Okay.
The only thing that I've heard kind of come up is the issue with folks who are unemployed right now but are receiving unemployment. And in many cases, people on unemployment are making more right now than they did at their jobs because of this extra $600 boon. So I have heard from some owners and managers are saying, well, it's unemployment. Do I have to accept it as a source of income? And is it, well, listen, they're making more money on unemployment than they would before. And if they can pay the rent, you have to be very careful of turning them away. Because correct me if I'm wrong, Wendy, but isn't unemployment a protected source of income?
Absolutely. Well, I don't know without looking, but my common sense tells me absolutely.
Oh.
Would that fall under the new Section 8 source of income discrimination that the city council passed? Because there was a Section 8 question that we didn't get to, but would that cover any source of income discrimination?
California state law passed the source of income law expanding what a source of income is, and San Diego also has that source of income ordinance. And what those both did was expand to say a Section 8 payment to a landlord is counted as income to the tenant. It used to be, since that income went directly to the landlord, a landlord didn't have to count it as tenant income because it wasn't paid to the tenant. And so that expanded the protection of, you can't discriminate against someone based on source of income. Like if they have, back in the day, if a couple wasn't married, landladies would, this would happen to me, discriminate against the people because they weren't married. They might discriminate because they don't want to count a certain income from a certain source. So there is a list of protected sources of income. Section 8 voucher was added to that list. And I don't have the list right in front of me, but if anyone wants to reach out to me, I'll get it for you.
We were going to do, prior to COVID-19, we had scheduled a live lunch and learn like we normally have, where we were going to discuss AB 1428 and the effects it's had on the market in general. And, there's what I'm finding is that there are a lot of changes that are causing some of the owners that have owned for a couple decades that are just kind of wore out on trying to deal with all these changes. A lot of my clients are not happy with the mandatory Section 8 or the source of income discrimination law that was put out. They're not happy with the new rent control law. And one of the questions we have here is, what are the COVID-19 eviction moratorium rules and how does that factor into investors' decision-making? We've kind of covered the moratorium rules, but I would say from a standpoint of investors' decision-making, at least those that I see that are the bulk of, say, the Southern California Apartment Association's membership, that independent owner that owns 30 units or less, they are starting to get a little wore out with a lot of these changes. And it seems like it's just making their job extremely difficult to try to keep up with all of the changes. And at least the ones I'm talking to are just wondering, what's going to be their next choice. Maybe it's time for a sale, and it's going to cause those new investors that are coming in most likely to pause and really think about how they can be more efficient in running the business. Are you guys seeing that, Molly, where it's the new world order of investing apartments is going to require a much more efficient type of management process?
I think so. Obviously, this has been going on for years, right? Every year we get new rules that directly impact property owners and managers and how you operate. And it's what I keep telling local and state legislators, that you are just piling on regulation upon regulation. And I've actually gone through, our rental agreement and forms before and identified bills that created, all this language. And so people wonder why leases are so long. Well, you can thank the legislature. But yeah, I hear from, I do operational advice. So I talk to owners all the time, many of whom, despite our best efforts, just can't keep up with all the changes. And so what I'm hearing more lately is, I don't want to manage my properties anymore. It's gotten too tough. I can't keep up with all the rules, and I want to turn it over to property management company and, direct them to where they can find those resources. So I'm definitely hearing that. I don't hear a lot on the investment side other than, every time rent control comes up, I'm going to sell my properties in California, and who can blame anybody?
Right. I like, Chris, good timing. You popped right in when we were talking about looking for a good management company. Paris, I see that we have a number of additional questions. We have about 10 minutes till we get 1:30. What additional questions do we have?
Yeah, so here's a question on looking into the future, maybe. It says, understanding that evictions will begin when the moratorium is lifted, do you still anticipate a 2 to 4 month turnaround time on unlawful detainers when they're allowed, or do you foresee extended wait periods until a case can go to court beyond the 2 to 4 month wait time?
Okay, well, there's a mistaken presumption in that question. Evictions can't commence when the moratorium is lifted because the Judicial Council Emergency Rule number 1 doesn't allow a summons to issue in your case unless you can prove that there's a threat to public health and safety. So evictions are forestalled not just by these moratorium and their various limitations, but by the Judicial Council Emergency Rule, which is in place as of today for 90 days past the state of emergency being lifted, and there is no date for that to be lifted. Is that right, Molly?
As far as I know, I'm sure the governor will extend it. So, I mean, if he did it and the emergency order is lifted at the end of this month, the soonest I think you'd be able to start the eviction process would be September. And then to add on to that, with all the court funding issues that we've had over the last few years and evictions only being done in Central, I don't know what the waiting period is going to end up being, because you're not just going to have new eviction cases. You're going to have ones that maybe had started before this all went down, that are going to have to be rescheduled and things like that. So, I mean, Wendy, if you have any ideas on how long.
Well, I will tell you that the San Diego Superior Court has implemented temperature screening at the door. The sheriff will take your temperature, and if you have over a certain degree, you can't go in. You have to wear a facial mask, but that doesn't really affect us because they've also canceled all hearings. Every eviction hearing has been canceled, every existing hearing, and that no new dates have been set. Future hearings will be by telephone or video, and they will be doing, well, they talked about social distancing in the courtroom, but now they're not letting us in the courtroom at all. But they are doing social distancing with staff. So in the court clerk's office, they are working with less staff so they can give them the space they need to honor social distancing. They went for months without processing their mail. They said they got 1,000 pieces of mail a day that was being boxed. So there is a backlog, less staff, no hearings. I wouldn't count on an eviction. And I'm shooting myself in the foot. Our business handles eviction. So I'm not being negative. I'm very aggressive in terms of landlord rights. I will push you, push the envelope to make sure a landlord's rights are exercised the first possible day they can be, and to the furthest extent the law allows.
You have a long-term eviction. It's time to see if you can pay them to get out.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to ask you,
can
Chris,
call us for a cash for keys.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is now, it seems like a lot of times we're kind of going backwards. So I heard earlier cash for keys. Is that a strategy that you're using, Chris, effectively?
Yeah, wherever possible. Now there's some people that have already talked to an attorney and they've got their heels dug in and they're going to see how long they can ride this wave of not paying rent. But even with those, if you offer them $5,000, $6,000, that's not a lot. That's a lot to sneeze at. They're gonna consider that, and over the long run, versus a year of vacancy, you're coming out ahead still, plus lawyer fees, which I'm sure are very reasonable for Wendy.
They used to be. Now it's going to cost more because there's more hearings involved.
It's like the problem's getting worse. Paris, how are we doing on questions?
We just have 2 left. The next one is whether rents will be declining in San Diego, and if so, by what %?
I say no. What do you guys say?
I can jump in here. So there was a slight dip in interest in April. We actually use a showing system that allows people to see units without interacting face-to-face with other people, which has really helped during COVID times. And since the initial scare and fear of COVID has lifted, we've been renting. We're actually at very low vacancy rates right now, lower than we were in normal times, just because everyone is staying put for the most part and not leaving, and there's still people that are looking for rentals.
Are you guys raising rents, Chris?
We're really trying not to raise rents on, if you mean our tenants that are currently in place, we're pretty much holding off on that for now. If you were going to raise rents, so say you're an owner and you're wanting to raise rents, my suggestion would be to make it their choice what their rent increase is going to be. So for example, when we raise rents normally, we don't just raise their rent and tell them this is what you're going to pay. We raise the rent and call it a month-to-month rent fee, so that they're paying for the opportunity to stay within a 30 days notice. It used to be 9%. We would say 9%, but if you sign an extension of your lease for a year, then it's only going to be 3%. So they would come to us, they would ask for the lease extension, they would ask to sign the lease, because then it was their choice that they were getting that smaller rent increase. So my suggestion is, if you're going to try to raise the rents, try to do it, number one, make sure that it's legal to raise rents in your area. And then number two, try to frame it in such a way that it's their choice, the rate, the rent that they're picking, so that you don't end up upsetting someone and having them say, oh, I have a COVID hardship. You know what? I'm not going to be able to pay the rents for now.
Good advice. Good advice. CoStar yesterday, I read their report, and it said that 12-month rent growth, because rents have been have cooled off the first quarter, is for the last 12 months 0.4%. So it doesn't seem like there's been much rent growth for the last 12 months, and they're forecasting a 1% forecast for rent growth. And maybe when the apartment association comes out with their next rent survey, we'll know what the real numbers are.
I find that a lot of times those rent surveys are kind of skewed by the luxury apartments, where they're raising rents by 6, 7, 8, 10% a year, where most B, C class, you're raising rents 3 to 5% a year. So part of that number is probably coming from these luxury apartments where they're not going to be able to get those kind of rent increases this year.
That's a good point. Chris, let me add to what you said. In AB 1482 world, if your property is subject to the rules of AB 1482, you could only offer a month-to-month rate of up to 6.8% in San Diego.
Yeah, that would be the right rate for right now.
Now, did that change? I thought it was 7.2%, Molly.
Changed.
Oh,
Yeah.
it changed.
Remember, it's the change in CPI from April 1 of one year from April 1 of the previous year. We don't get an April report, we get a March report, but nevertheless, it's what's in place come April 1. So yeah, a lot of folks get confused and think it's calendar year and things like that. And they've picked this middle of the year date that complicates matters. So we're at 6.8 now.
6.8, mark it down. Well, we have one more question, Paris. Let's answer that last question, and then we'll move on to a shutdown of the event.
The last question is directed for Wendy. It's about a dilemma with rent raising as well. It says our community in San Diego has inclusionary units. SDHC has finally released a new max rent amounts for the community. In the past, max rents had increased and we've increased everyone to the new max rent. However, we are not currently increasing rent on renewals on our other conventional units at the community. Is there an issue with increasing the rent on the inclusionary units and not the conventional units?
Well, first of all, I'm not giving any legal advice on whether you can raise the rent on inclusionary and to what amount, but it's not discriminatory to raise rent on inclusionary while not raising rent on conventional. You are allowed to treat them differently because they are different.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, Molly, Wendy, Cody, Chris, thank you guys so much for participating today. This has been fantastic. A lot of questions were answered. We still have close to 60 people that have tuned in all the way to the 90-minute mark, which is amazing. Maybe we'll get an Oscar award for our presentation today. And what I'm thinking is that maybe in a quarter from now, 3-4 months, we probably do another one of these just to analyze what the changes have been since we did this one today. But again, on behalf of the San Diego chapter of the CCI Institute, thank you guys so much. And to all of those who have tuned in, thank you for being a part of this. We look forward to you attending our next webinar. We're going to be trying to figure out a strategy of how to bring more value via webinar. Again, this is a new platform for us, but I think this first one has been a success. So we're going to be meeting with the board tomorrow to discuss future strategies. So again, on behalf of the CCIM San Diego chapter, thanks everybody and have a great day.
Thanks all.
Thank you all. Cheers.